Hi everybody! This is our vlog all about our first ever visit to Europa Park in Germany. We flew from Stansted Airport into Basel Airport, which is on the border between France and Switzerland. There are other airports that you can also go to. That meant that we then had to get public transport from Basel Airport to Europa Park, and I'll talk you through how we did that. To get from Basel Airport to Europa Park, you follow all of the signage in the airport, which was really clear. You need to exit via the Swiss side, not the French side. And then as soon as you go out of the exit, you will see the bus station right in front of you. You need to get on the number 50 bus, which takes you to Basel Bahnhof, which is the main train station, and it's the end of the line for that bus, so you can't miss it. Once at that train station, there's various routes you can take. We didn't want to hang around for like an hour or two, so we opted to take the route that was leaving the quickest, which was a tram and then 2 trains, and then you have to get the shuttle bus from Ringsheim straight out to Europa Park. There's actually a free shuttle bus and there's a paid, just like a local bus, which we didn't realise. So we ended up paying for the local bus, but there is a free shuttle bus as well. I'm not gonna lie, we found all of the public transport routes to be really faffy. It wasn't difficult, there was just a lot of chopping and changing, and we spent about 150 euros-ish altogether on all of the different public transport routes. So when we were coming home, we actually opted to go for a private airport transfer. We used a company called Connecto, or Connect2, and they were excellent. You booked the whole thing online. It cost us 139 euros for the 3 of us and all of our luggage, and it was less than an hour door to door. I would highly recommend doing that. We stayed at the Hotel Colosseo, which Archie actually picked, and wow, did he do a good job. There's lots of hotels on site, but this is the one that he chose, and the rooms were lovely, and look at that view out there. There's a whole part of a Colosseum that's been built. There's 2 restaurants on site. One was Italian, so pizza, pasta, things like that. The other one was a world buffet, which is actually where we ended up eating most nights. It wasn't our intention, but just because of timings of the park and things like that, that's where we ended up eating. But the food was so nice, we definitely didn't mind. On site at our hotel, as well as the beautiful Colosseum that was outside, there was this little splash area. There was also a pool that had an indoor section and an outdoor section and a children's section, and there was also a children's indoor play area, a bit like a soft play. The next morning, we got straight into the park. If you're a hotel guest, you get into the park 45 minutes ahead of the main gates opening at 9 AM, so you get park access from 8:15 AM. On our very first day, we chose to use that time to sort of walk around a little bit while it was still quiet and acclimatise. This park is absolutely massive, and there's so many different areas and they all sort of link together, so it did take us a little while to sort of get our bearings. One of the rides that is open in the sort of early hours opening times is Pirates of Batavia. This has got to be one of the best dark rides that I think I've ever been on. We rode it so many times. This little bit was a bit of a hidden gem. If you go into this bit, you can actually see the launch pad for Bluefire. Dotted around the park there's lots of play areas and lots of interactive water features, which was absolutely perfect because it was boiling hot when we were there, so we definitely took advantage of all the water rides, even if that meant sometimes we got absolutely soaking. So immersive. They'd really thought about everybody's experience. Here, for example, Archie's designing a water show that's in the middle of the lake. That you'll find at this park is real sort of historical elements. So this is the Mir space station. It's an actual training model that was used to train the Russian cosmonauts in space. I think that's absolutely brilliant that there's things like that you can just have a walk through and see as well. Later on in the vlog you'll see that there's an actual 2 portions of the Berlin Wall, and there's different museums that are dotted around the park too. Because this theme park is owned by Mack Rides, who now make some extraordinary coasters and big rides, they've really thought about the sort of overall sensory experience. Now sometimes that's absolutely amazing, like in the Arthur ride where you go through a hive and you can smell the honey, but on this ride there's a part where you go through where the dinosaurs have collected up all the poo and they've included a poo smell. I don't think that's really necessary. This was my favourite ride from the whole trip. It's the Can coaster. You go up a spiral lift hill around the Eiffel Tower, and then the actual coaster itself reminded me quite a lot of Space Mountain in Disneyland Paris. There's a really good mix of rides at this park. So there's a lot of flat rides, lots of which you've probably seen at other theme parks, but at Europa Park they've put their own overlays on to keep in with their theming. Then there's some really unique rides that you won't have seen anywhere else. Some obviously big coasters now that Mac have made that you definitely won't see at other places. And then they've really thought about the sort of age range of their guests. So there's some rides that are specifically for younger and littler ones. Archie was actually too tall to ride some of those, so it's worth checking all the different height restrictions before you book. This was Archie's favourite ride. It's Arthur. It's a hybrid coaster dark ride which tells the story of the fairy tale film Arthur, and every time you ride it it's slightly different because the arms of the cars all turn around. And this was Europa's take on the fairy tale forest. If you've ever been to Efteling or seen our vlogs about Efteling, you'll know how huge and interactive their fairy tale forest is. So Europa Park had their own version. It was slightly smaller, but it was definitely worth having a look round. This was another highlight of the trip, certainly for Archie. It was the roller coaster restaurant, and he's been wanting to go to one of these for quite some time. You order your food on the screens that are at your table, and then your individual meals get sent to you via these roller coaster tracks. It's really clever, and actually it was very quick service, and the food was really quite tasty. already lots that exist there on YouTube, which would be much better than I can film at the moment, and mostly because we were only there for a limited time and I wasn't sure how many times we would get to do re-rides, so I tried not to have my phone out. But here's a few clips of one of the dark rides that Archie really enjoyed. This was the bar that was inside our hotel, Hotel Colosseo, and so we got some drinks and we headed up onto the Colosseum to have a look at the view, and it was absolutely stunning. It was a lovely way to spend the evening. On our second day, we actually headed away from Europa Park itself and we headed across to Rolantica, which is the water park. Rolantica actually has longer opening hours than Europa Park does, which we were a little bit sceptical about, and we actually booked like a private little booth area where there's like a little sofa bed and a safe and things like that, because we thought we'd probably need a break from the water park at some point. I couldn't have been more wrong. We were in the water park for 12 and a half hours, and that is an extraordinary amount of time to be in a water park. Again, I haven't done any filming inside the water park. There's lots of other vlogs on it if you want to go and have a look, but there were indoor and outdoor pools, slides, a lazy river, a wild river, like a dark ride inside there and a flat ride. It was absolutely incredible. You should go and check it out. Now this is something that I had never experienced before. It's a virtual reality overlay for a coaster. So the actual coaster itself is the Can-Can coaster, but you go into a different entrance and into a different waiting area, and you get fitted with a virtual reality helmet, mask while you're waiting, and then it takes you through the story of Phantom of the Opera. So you actually get onto the ride vehicle all in virtual reality and ride the whole coaster with your VR mask on. I wasn't sure what it was going to be like. I suffer from travel sickness sometimes, but it was really, really good, and it was so interesting and a really good way to have a re-ride and have a completely different experience. Something else that Europa Park did incredibly well is there was always some sort of street entertainment or shows or bands or something like that going on. So even when you were resting or waiting in between going to different rides, there was still always some sort of entertainment to keep you going. This was the Zorro show, which took place in the theatre in the Spanish area. It was a really impressive stunt show, horse and rider stunt show. Archie actually enjoyed this so much that we made sure to make time on our last day at Europa to go and watch it again, because he wanted to be closer to the action, so we actually went right down to the very front row to watch it again. was another one of the shows that Europa Park had on offer. It was an ice skating show, and it was based on the film that Europa Park made to star their mascots, so Ed and Edda the mice and their other park mascots, called Grand Prix of Europe. So the storyline is, that's Ed, he's a race car driver, the baddie sabotages his car and he has an accident, so then Edda takes over and she becomes the race car driver and saves the day. This was another one of the VR overlays, so it's onto the Alpine coaster, which is like a mine train coaster, and on this one you actually get to choose of 8 different overlays, which made it even more re-rideable. It is worth noting though that these VR experiences are an upcharge. We were at Europa Park for 3.5 days and we still didn't get to experience everything. There are 100 attractions and there are lots of shows and street entertainments. I know that they also add in seasonal extra shows and things like that as well. It was off-peak when we went. The crowd calendar said that it was about 50% capacity when we were there. I wouldn't have wanted to experience it any busier than that, although wait times were really, really good because the operations at the park were excellent. So most of the time we either had walk-ons or very short wait times. I think the longest line we had was about 25 minutes for some of the bigger rides. Just due to the architecture in some areas and the amount of rides that they've managed to squeeze into the park size, there are some bits of the park that don't feel as open and as spacious as this area, for example, where they have the parade come through. There are plenty of places in the park to chill out and have a sit down. There was loads of nice shady areas. There was seating everywhere. They also had lots of water features like I mentioned earlier, and they had a mist tunnel. They even had staff at one point were just out with like water pistol type things that you could choose to go up to, and they would interact with you and they would squish you with the water pistols. So they've really thought about the guest experience for when it's really, really warm. So all in all, we had an absolutely fantastic holiday here at Europa Park. I would highly recommend it for anyone, especially if you're into theme parks. They have lots of thrill coasters that I don't really go into so much on this vlog. Phil enjoys those, but some of them are a little bit too intense for me, like Voltron. But they have lots of family rides, lots of flat rides, and you could just spend so much time just walking around the park and looking at all the interactive features as well. if you think I've missed anything, or if there's anything specific you'd like to know about the park, if you've got any questions, just pop them in the comments and we'll get back to you. Thanks for watching!